the Oceanic esports scene has always been one of those regions that are behind compared to the big regions like North America, Europe, Korea, and China. For example, like League of Legends didn't have an Oceanic server until about like 4 years after it got released. And during those 4 years, everyone on Oceania has to play on 200 ping because they have to connect to the NA server. And because of that, the OCE players weren't trying as hard. They're like, oh, it doesn't matter if I lose. It's probably going to happen anyway because of the ping. So that is already like a that's already has set back Oceania in terms of League of Legends. And since League of Legends is the biggest esports in the world, you can see how much that impacted the esports scene for Oceania to get involved in the scene of League. So I know Oceania includes Southeast Asia, Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, but for now I'm only referring to Australia and New Zealand when I say Oceania. So from now on, when I say Oceania, keep in mind that I am only referring to New Zealand and Australia. So before I get into Oceania specifically, I'm going to talk about the West in general, because Australia and New Zealand is part of the West. So the West is pretty much North America, Europe, and Oceania, or New Zealand and Australia. And I'll explain why they are behind compared to the Asian regions, the powerhouses like China and Korea. So before we get into the infrastructure, so outside of infrastructure, I think a lot of it has to do with the Asian culture versus the Western culture. Now, being someone that belongs in an Asian family, that was born in Asia and spent half my childhood there, I can relate to both of these cultures, and I'm going to explain why the cultural difference matters so much in esports. So now I'm going to show you some pictures. These pictures will show the difference in how the two cultures perceive things. Of course, like none of the pictures represent every single person, but it does give a general idea for both sides. So let me just pull this up. Alright, so here's the first picture. And so on the left side, or the blue side, represents the West, and the red side, or the right side, represents the East, or the Asian culture. Okay, so this first picture is how people, or how the two different cultures view their boss or their leader. Okay, so in esports, your boss, of course, will be the owner of the organization, or your boss can also be, okay, well, it's not your boss, but representatives of your boss can also be other staff members in the scene, like your team managers, your coaches, and analysts, right? So as we can see here, like the difference is hierarchy. Okay, in the Asian culture, we have this hierarchy for the elderly people where you have to respect them a lot. Now, I'm not saying that Westerners don't respect their elderly. I'm saying that Asian culture puts more of an emphasis on respect for the elderly. Alright? So this doesn't just apply to elderly people. So it doesn't just include your grandparents. It includes people that are just older than you in general. So this includes, of course, your grandparents. This includes your parents, your older siblings, and even some of your friends and mates that are just a few years older than you. Now, since the esports staff, so the coaches, the analysts, and all that, since they are pretty much always older than the players have to respect them. They are taught as a child to respect people older than them, so by the time they are in the teenage years when they are in the players, they have to respect the staff members because they're usually a lot older than them. And if a coach, so if you talk back to someone older than you, before I get to the next point, if you talk back to someone that's much older than you, you're considered like the most disrespectful person ever. Like, if my parents told me something and I talk back and start an argument with them, like, I would get in so much trouble, and I would be considered so rude, so disrespectful, so like what am I doing? Like, dishonoring my parents, like the level of disrespect that other people see in you when you talk back to older people in the Asian culture is just like huge. Okay, so because of this, if a coach tells you to do something, you have to do it. Like, it doesn't matter if you don't want to play what he tells you to play at the time. It doesn't matter if you don't think it's fun. You have to do what he says, or the organization will just simply kick you. Alright? So in the Western scene, some players have a lot more freedom. Like, players usually have a lot more freedom in the Western scene. So in Korea, the coach would be like, alright, you have to play this, you know? But in the Western scene, the coach would be more, like, have a bit more leeway, give the player more freedom. He would say, "Oh, you know, he would say, I think you should play this. I think you should play X hero," and then the player will be like, "Oh, but I feel more comfortable, and I think this hero suits more, and I want to play this hero." And then the coach will be like, "Oh, yeah, okay. If you really think you can do that, then yes, you can go play this hero." You know, like, the coach gives the players a lot more leeway and a lot more freedom. So but like in Korea and China, you don't get that. Like, the coach won't say, "I think you should play this." He will say, "You will play this. You will play this. You will. This team will run this strategy. We will have to test this team comp." Like, there is no leeway. There's no, "Oh, I think you should." There's no, "Oh, you guys should try this." Like, you guys have to try this. So that's like the authority that the coach has. And if you talk back or refuse to do it to the coach at the time, then again, you would just get kicked from the team. You get kicked from the organization. And it sounds simple, right? Just kick the person. If they don't like it, just kick the person. Like, why is it so easy to kick the person? It's so easy because, like, the teams are so unhesitant to kick people in the Korean scene and China, is that there are so many other people that are also trying to get into the scene. Like, it doesn't matter. They say, if it doesn't matter if we don't. They think if it, like, it doesn't matter if we don't have you. We have 50 people waiting in line to fill your spot, so you can either do your job or just leave, right? That's how it is in those Asian regions. That's how it is. So you can see that in those regions, the players have a lot more pressure to perform well because they know that they can be easily replaced. Now, in the West, again, the coaches don't have that kind of authority, and they don't have that kind of power. In some teams, even the players have more power than the coaches. They can say, "Oh, I don't think this coach is doing his job," or they can say, "Oh, I don't like this coaching style our current coach has." Some players, if they are a really good player and they have the status, they can even get the coach fired. They can go to the manager and say, "You know what? I think this coach is making me play worse. I don't know if we can win the championships with this guy," and then they can easily get the coach fired if they have the status, which is a bit ridiculous if you ask me. So, not only that, some players in the West still won't even accept coaching in the first place. Like, some people still think, "Oh, why do I need this guy to tell me what to do? He's a lower rank than me. He's not as good as me. He doesn't know as much about the game as I do." Like, it doesn't matter. Okay? That's what some people think, and they don't accept and they don't receive that coaching. And if they don't receive that coaching, they don't have that analysis from the spectator perspective. And they're just so, like, I really don't want to say ignorant, but it is to some kind of degree, because they're just shutting information out from another perspective. Because no matter how good at the game you are, you can be the best player in the world. But even if a spectator is in bronze, in, of course, a game like League of Legends or Overwatch, if a spectator is in bronze, then he or she will probably still see something that you won't be able to see in the heat of the moment, in the battle, in those overtime or the last minute Nexus pushes. Like, the spectator will still see something during those times that you probably weren't able to see at the same time. So now this whole coaching thing and how the different cultures perceive coaches ties in to the next picture. So I'm going to take this picture away, and I'm going to show you the next picture. Alright, so this picture shows how individuals perceive themselves. So again, the left side, or the blue side, represents the Western world, and the red side... Okay, I think I just fucked it up. So the left side on the blue side represents the Western world, and the right side, or the red side, represents the Eastern world, or the Asian culture, right? So Again, this doesn't represent every single person. It's just a very generalized perspective. So so what this tells us is that people from the West, they value pride, while people from the East or Asia, they value humility. Now, when Western people are children, they get praised a lot by their parents. If a kid from a Western family shows his parents a picture that he drew, then they will say, "Oh wow, nice work, Jimmy," or they'll be like, "Wow, this is very creative." They would praise the child a lot. Now, I used to draw a lot when I was a kid, and every time I go to show my parents my drawings, they will say something like, "Why is there a line here?" Or "Why does this line look funny?" Or, I would draw a plane, and because I was a kid, I don't know much about planes. I'm just using my imagination. It'd be like, "Why is there propellers at the top of a jet and an oversized gun at the bottom?" You know. Now, it's not that my parents are idiots and they're dicks and they want me to feel bad. No, that's completely not the case. My parents are nice people. But what they want me to do is they want me to take what they say as constructive criticism and use it to improve in my future drawings. So, let me tell you a story from my experience, okay? So, I was in primary school. So, for those of you that are in America, that means elementary. I was about 8 years old. And of course, I didn't. I kind of got here. I kind of just got here for a few years. I didn't know the culture very well, you know. So I remember when I was 8 years old, and we were in. We have an outdoors class, and what we were doing that day is we were throwing shot puts and we were throwing discuses. And I remember somebody. He was a Westerner. Somebody. Oh, was it she actually? She was a Westerner. So she grabbed the shot put. I was behind her in the line. I was next one to throw. So I watched her throw, and she took the shot put. She threw it, and then it almost beat the person before her. It almost did. And I said, "Oh, oh, that was so close. If only she used a little bit more strength." And then afterwards, after I threw, like I somehow like I was in trouble. Like the teacher came up to me and was like, "What did you say to her?" And I said, "But all I said was that she needed a little bit more strength." It's like, "Why did you being so mean? Go sit in the corner over there." Like I didn't even mean to be offensive. Like it is the fact that she needed more strength to beat the guy before her, right? It's not offensive. It's the fact. Like that's the fact. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. But somehow I got in trouble for that because she took that in a negative way and she cried about it. So I went home to my parents and I asked, "Hey, I got in trouble today," and they're like, "Oh, what'd you do?" And so I told them what happened. I was like, "Oh, there's this person throwing a shot put. She didn't get it. She didn't beat the person before her." And I told her if only she had enough strength, if she just put in a little bit more strength, she could do it. And then she started crying, and the teacher thought I was being mean and stuff, and she threw me in the corner. And my parents said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Like she did need a bit more. She probably did need a bit more strength. It's okay. Like it's fine." Like that's what my parents say. It's fine, alright? But if my parents were Westerners, they would be like, "Oh, why did you say this to her? You should not have said this to her. You hurt her feelings really bad. That was so mean." You know. So that's the difference, right? So Asian parents will always give their children criticism because they always want their kids to do better. They always push their kids to do better. Like for example, if I'm an international student and I went to study overseas, like I'm fresh, I grew up in China and I just went to study overseas in the West, and we all know that international student fees are like really super expensive. My parents will still like invest that money, like will still throw that money on me for me to do good, for me to study overseas, for me to see the world. Like they would still invest a lot of money on me studying overseas. And then the person, or in this case me, in this scenario, I would be like, "Oh my god, my parents have invested so much in me. I have to not let them down. I have to succeed. They work so hard on their money and they're putting it on me. I have to do good. I have to impress them." You know, and that kind of mentality gets transferred into esports, where an organization is investing so much in the staff, in the practice facilities, so like team houses and offices, into coaches, and the coaches are always pushing the players to get better. You know, you have to play this, you need to try this, man, you have to study this because this isn't working. So the player will have the same mentality of you know, oh my god, they're investing so much in me, they're always pushing me, I can't let them down, I have to succeed. Now don't get me wrong, both, like parents from both cultures, they want their children to have a happy life, alright? All parents want their kids to have a happy life. You'd be a pretty bad parent if you don't want your kid to have a happy life. And that is the Asian way, if you will, for parents to make their kid happy. They want their kids to be successful. They're always pushing them to be successful, and they believe that when they are successful, they will be happy. Alright, that's how the Eastern culture perceive things. Now in the Western world, the way their parents make their children happy is by praising them a lot, by always trying to make the kids feel good about themselves. And as a result, the Western children grow up, they're being used to they're used to being praised, and hence why that's a lot of Western players have a lot of pride and ego compared to Asian players. So if we go back to my little childhood story of the shot put, it's because that girl was too used to being praised. She wasn't used to people criticizing her, and she took that criticism as, you know, not constructive criticism that she could use better, but she took that as an insult. All right, which like did not help her at all when it could have helped her, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's the difference. Now, excuse me. Now Asian children, now Asian children that grew up in their culture, they're used to, on the other hand, they're used to being criticized. They're used to always like talked about by like their family and the peers, like, you know, you could have done this, man, like, yeah, that was good, but yeah, you could have done this and that would have been way better. You know, they're used to being criticized, and because of that, they will always think about what they can do better. Like, no matter how good they did, they will always think, oh yeah, if I did this, but then my parents could have said I did this, or my friend over there he's probably gonna say I could have did this. You know, they always think that there's something they can do better, and they always look for it. Alright, so of course I'll give you another example. So for example, we take a League of Legends player. Alright, Faker. The best player in the world. Alright, Faker. Now, if Faker was a Westerner, you can't tell that being the best in the world comes with absolute zero, nil pride at all, with ego. You're the best player in the world, and you have absolutely no ego, right? I doubt that anyone that's listening to this can do that, because you're the best player in the world, right? You feel good about yourself because you're the best player in the world. But Faker is the best player in the world, and he doesn't let that get to him. He's got like no ego with it, all right? So if you look at what he look and listen to what he says in interviews, he never shows any signs of ego. Like any signs at all. Like he would like, sure, he would maybe like talk a little bit of smack with his rival with Pawn right there, but you know, overall against most teams, you know, he usually say things like, no, he will pretty much always say things like, they're a team that can still beat us, or you know, we can't underestimate the team even though they're a weak team, like we don't know when they can upset us, you know. He always says things like that. The worst it got was him just saying, I'm confident that we will win against them. Like that's like the worst it got. And that's not even cocky, like to the slightest degree. Like that's not even showing, you know, like, oh, I'm the best, you know, I'm gonna crush this guy, you know. That's not even like giving signs of any of that. So now on the other hand, we're gonna have another example. We have Double Lift, another League of Legends player, considered one of the best AD carries in North America. Now, yes, of course he is Asian, but he grew up in the Western world. He grew up in North America, so that means the Western culture still applies to him. So for those that followed League of Legends eSports scene at the time, which was a few years ago, like 2013, 2012, stuff like around then, we would know his famous "everyone is trash" attitude, right? So in an interview, he said, this is what he said in an interview, he said, I just like the feeling of shutting people up. You know somebody that says I'm better than you, and I'm like, no, you're not. All right, he said that in the interview. So from those, so we can see that Doublelift likes to put himself above people, whereas Faker likes to put himself below people. There's a difference. Faker likes to put himself below people. Like, okay, we need to be careful of this. They can still beat us. We have to still be our A game. Whereas Doublelift be like, yeah, man, I'm gonna crush you. You think you're better than me? You're not. I'm gonna freaking wreck you. You can see the difference, the two different mentalities. Like for example, when I play, so right now I'm playing Overwatch. I am a diamond player, and in I am in an amateur organization. So as a diamond player, I know that chances are I'm probably better than most players out there, like all the casual players or the average players. I'm probably better than them. But this is what I think, and this is what usually the Asian players think. They say, what's the difference of comparing yourself to those players, to those casuals down there? Like, there's no, why would you do that? What benefit are you going to get? Are those casual players trying to go pro? No, they're not. They're just playing the game casually. Like, why are you comparing yourself to them? It's a complete, different mindset and a completely different approach to the game. What are you going to get by comparing yourself to them? Yeah, you're going to feel better about yourself, and then what? Like, how are you going to play How are you going to play in the future? What then? Okay, so that's like another difference. And I always think, and that is why some of my friends, they say, oh my god, you're diamond, you're really good at this game, and I always say, no, I'm not, because what they're doing is they're comparing me to themselves, which are the casual players. But what I'm doing is I'm comparing myself to the pros, to the grandmasters, to the people at the pro scene, and that's why I think I'm not good. All right, so. Excuse me. So from that and the two examples, as I said before, we can see how the players that are raised in different cultures have this different mentality about themselves, right? So of course, like in Asia, there are some exceptions, of course, but generally in Asia, if someone says they're better than you, then the player would be like, okay, the player would be like, yeah, you probably are better than me, like maybe you can teach me something, or maybe I can learn something from you, instead of just simply saying, no, you're not better than me. Who are you to say you're better than me? I'm not going to take crap from you. Like, and we can actually see that which one is more beneficial to the player. Of course, the second one of saying, no, you're not better than me, like, you're not going to tell me you're better than me, that is letting the pride and the ego get in the way. Whereas if you open up to them better than you, if you just accept even the possibility that they're better than you, you have a chance to learn something from them, and you have a chance to improve. Alright, and that's the two differences, and that's why it's easier for Asian players to improve, because they have that mentality. Alright, and here again, like, you can see like how you can see how the mentality affects the players from the two different cultures, and how they view themselves and what they do. Now we're going to move on to the next picture. So I'm going to put this away, and we're going to move on to this picture. Alright, so again, blue is Western, red is Eastern, or Asian. So if you can't tell the difference, the picture on Western has a guy frowning, or not happy, and then in his head he's thinking of, I'm not happy, like he's actually mad and he's expressing it. Whereas in the Asian culture, the guy is mad on the inside, but he cannot let it out. He's smiling on the outside. He has to hold it in. Alright? In this picture, it shows the difference in expressing emotions between the two cultures. Okay, now in the West, we encourage freedom of speech. Alright? Allowing people to express their honest opinions to one another. Alright, in Asia, or specifically in Korea, if you have something that you dislike about your training environment, your teammates, other staff members, you gotta put up with it, or just leave. Like, there's no other choice. You either put up with it. If you don't like it, you put up with it, or just leave. The organization doesn't care if you like your teammate or not. If your teammate's doing well, they'll just see you as you complaining about nothing and getting in the way, and they'll just tell you to leave. Again, they have like 50 people waiting in line to take a spot, and that's why players don't complain, even if they don't like it. It's because they know they can be easily replaced, and they'll just have to do their best with what they have. If you're tilted, and you've like, for example, if you're tilted, or you've had enough, or you're mentally cracked, you you've had it. Okay, excuse me. So if if you've had it, you're done. You're having a mental breakdown. You're cracked, and you let it out. Not only will you be kicked in Korea, not only will you be kicked, but you'll most likely never play for any team again. Like, all the organizations will hear about this, and they'll say, why is this guy kicking up all this fuss? Like, why can't he just play the game? And like, everyone else is playing the game and working hard. Why is this guy making all this fuss and drama? Like, they will never hire you again. Like, if anyone sees someone like this, they will never hire you again. So if you do have a mental breakdown and you let it out, then effectively you've just ended your gaming career. Like, that's how it is in Korea, or in China, in Asia in general. But in the West, if you have a mental breakdown, then sure, you may still get kicked. You may still leave at your own will, but you'll probably still get picked up by other teams if you're a good enough player. In Korea, it doesn't matter how good of a player you are. If you kick up this kind of fuss, they don't care. They don't care how good you are. You're just making your team play bad. So sometimes, and in the West, sometimes the team might even change the way they work just so the player can stay and keep playing for them. Alright? Like, this, is completely reversed. So in Asia, you have the player having to adjust to how the team works. But in the West, you can get these conditions where the team has to adjust to how the player works. There's like a complete opposite spectrum there. And this is due to another problem, which we'll move on to now. Alright, so in the amateur scene, and in specifically, again, Korea, it's a lot more like try-hard than the amateur scenes in the West. Now, in the West, when people get into the amateur scene, they still have jobs, they have girlfriends, they have university or other tertiary educations. They have other things that require them to spend time and effort on in their lives. But in Korea, when people get into the amateur scene, they go hard. Like, they have meetups at PC bangs every single day. They practice, they play in person, they meet up, they practice like ridiculous hours. Like, it's just the amateur scene, they're already practicing like 5 to 8 hours a day. The Western amateur scene is nowhere near like that. If you have an amateur scene and like nothing's settled in yet, you're just trying to see if you can get the qualifiers, you have people that are like, oh, I need to go pick up my brother from school, can we like move the scrim back for 10 minutes? Or you have like, in the middle of scrims, someone like, oh yeah, I need to go to the bathroom, be right back real quick. Like, if you do this in Korea, like, no team will want you. Like, if you are not willing to give up simple, and like, if you're not willing to give up and postpone simple things like that for scrims, like, no team would want you in Korea. Like, not even amateur teams. Okay? But in the West, you can do that. You can say, oh, I need to do this real quick, like, really quick. I just need to heat up my food, and, in the middle of scrims. Like, which is, again, it's pretty ridiculous because it is scrims, and you're supposed to be playing and trying your hardest and doing your best. Right? But again, the Western players have a lot more freedom, and they don't have as much authority over them as the players do in Korea. Alright, another thing is that Korean players, or Asian players, are willing to sacrifice all the things that I mentioned earlier to try to go pro. So again, that's part-time jobs, that's girlfriends, sometimes even friends and family, school, university. So they're willing to sacrifice all that to go pro. Now, because so many people are willing to sacrifice a lot, and they're trying so hard to go pro, that means they are really trying hard on solo queue. So more specifically, again, the solo queue we're talking about is Overwatch, League of Legends, and to a degree Dota 2 as well. And to get those, and they try really hard on solo queue is because they want to get those top spots. They want to be on the top of the ladder. They want to get noticed by those big organizations, and they want to get picked up. Alright, that's how you get into the pro scene, or try to get noticed in Korea. You just try really hard on solo queue, you have to get the top ranks and hope you get noticed. And because people at the top, they try really, really hard, this trickles down to the lower ranks. They're like, oh, if he's trying super hard and I want to be at that level, then I need to try super hard as well. All right, that's how it is. So it becomes this like, and it works the other way in the West as well, which we'll, which where the guy is, where the pros don't need to try as hard, and then because the pros don't need to try as hard, that means the amateurs don't need to try as hard, because if this guy's trying not as hard and he's at the top, then that means I don't need to try as hard to get to the same level as him. And as you can see, it's this like self-perpetuating cycle about solo queue. If the Koreans, if a team of Koreans went into NA and they tried hard on the NA solo queue as they did on the Korean solo queue, that would make NA solo queue a much better environment, because that means the pros in NA now have to try as hard as them to get to the top. And that creates a more competitive solo queue environment. And that is the difference, because you don't have to take my word for it. You can go watch streams, right? If you watch any Western stream, so I'll use Overwatch as an example, because Overwatch has a built-in voice comm, and it's a very heavily team-based game. If you watch any Western streamer playing solo queue in Western regions like NA, EU. So for example, like people like Qwerty, Overwatch streamer, and Surefour, again a pro player for Cloud9 at this time, you will sometimes barely hear any communication. Right, so the streamers that are playing would be talking to their stream, they would be reading chat, they would be alt-tabbing to check their Twitter, they're not going to be trying as hard, and there's barely any communications because everyone's probably doing that. You will still hear, you'll still hear people like swearing and tilting comms like, oh my god, like, why did you pick this hero, like, I don't think we need this, oh fuck this, like, I'm gonna throw this game, you will still hear that a lot more than you do in Korea. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen in Korea, I'm just saying this happens a lot less in Korea, right? And also in NA or EU solo queue, you will hear a lot of people making these random jokes in the middle of games, jokes that have no relevance to the current game they're playing at all. Like, they would just say something that they think is funny, and it's got nothing to do with winning the game. All right, you'll see that. You see that a lot in Western solo queue. Excuse me. Now, after you watch those Western streamers, okay, and straight away you turn on a Korean stream and you watch a Korean streamer streaming or playing solo queue in Korea. So from my experience, I watched Miro. So Miro, M-I-R-O, he is the tank player for a Korean Overwatch team called Lunatic High, which is considered one of the best Overwatch teams in Korea. So I watched him, and then I watched him playing solo queue, and then you can immediately, like, you just know the difference. All right. You can hear voice comms, like, they're always active. They're always up. There's always someone talking to voice comms every single game. Now my Korean's not good enough to fully understand what they're saying, but you can tell from the tone of their voices that they're actually doing their best to give the information to the team. They're asking questions a lot to one another. Probably asking about ult statuses or where's the enemy. You can tell by listening to the comms. You don't even need to know what they're saying. You can just tell by listening to how much they're saying and their tone of voice that they're treating solo queue games like pro games, and they're trying really hard to win. Now, what kind of Western player would treat a solo queue game like an actual pro game? You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody does that in solo queue in the Western world, because it's just solo queue. Yeah, solo queue doesn't matter, so solo queue ranks doesn't matter, and admittedly, solo queue is a very flawed system, but in that very limited metric, it still shows, like, how good you are compared to other people, in that limited metric. Alright? So you can tell in Korea solo queue, they are really, like, trying hard to win. And again, they're trying hard because they want to get to the top level, where the pros are also trying very hard. They know that getting into the pro scene in their region is very harsh. Alright? And that's something that we'll talk about now. And why is it very harsh? Okay? So, since so many people in Korea, or in China, or in Asia in general, since so many people want to go pro, trials often last a very short amount of time because you have more people to trial. They often last like a day, or sometimes even just like a few games. So if you can't perform at that moment they give you, then you'll just be kicked, and then they'll make room for the next person for the trial, and then that's it. That's it for you. Like, they don't care if you have the potential to do, to do a lot better later on. They don't care if, you just need this warm-up game and then you have to build up, They don't care if the meta's not, in your favor. If you cannot perform right then and there, then get out, because we got 50 people waiting in line to take your spot. Like, these, what kind of Western player would want a trial like that? So these players are willing to go through this harsh path, like, to the pro scene, you know. and Western people will think, Jesus Christ, like, that's way too much, like, to go pro in a game. Like, that's like so dumb. Like, you get kicked so often, you don't even give a second chance. No, you don't get a second chance because there's just too many people to trial. So again, you can see the difference on how hard people are trying, and because the Asian players, they sacrifice so much for the game that the success in that career in esports, the success in it means so much more to them than the people in the West. Okay, so I know people in the West, in the amateur scene, they have jobs, and sometimes even still in the higher pro scene, they still have girlfriends. I know some Korean teams, they are not allowed to have girlfriends. And in the West, like, people are allowed to have those kind of things on the side. They're allowed to have the comfort. They're allowed to have a little bit of luxury. In Korea, they're not. They're not allowed to have the luxury. And because, they sacrifice all that luxury, all that comfort, it just means so much more. I've heard Korean players, like, say this, like, after losing the finals. They made the grand finals, like, the top 2 teams. And so technically, like, if they lose the finals, they'll still get second place. But they make grand finals, they lost the grand finals, and they will still say something like, oh, I would rather just lose out in the group stages or quarterfinals and just be a nobody than making it all the way to the finals just to be defeated. Like, they would say something like that. Because they have everything behind them. They have the coaches, they have the support from the family all the way back home. They have the organization investing a lot of, facilities towards him. That the coach is always pushing them, telling him what's best, telling him what he should do. Like, if he fails, like, he was in the grand finals, he was meant to win. He was like just that one series that he needs to win, and he didn't win. Like, they're just so crushed after that. Like, I've seen how crushed players get when they lose after finals because they've sacrificed so much. Like, they have the organization and the coaches, like, always pushing them. And as ridiculous as this sounds, like, since they sacrifice so much, they feel like their life has failed. Okay? They sacrifice the comfort of living with their friends and family. They sacrifice the reinsurance of having a stable income from part-time jobs. They sacrifice the romance of having a girlfriend, the comfort of not having a coach in your face all the time. They chose conquest over comfort. But what kind of Westerner would, if you think about it, what kind of Westerner would give up all that for a video game? Like, why would you give up all that comfort just for a video game? Okay? So that's why, from the cultural side, the West overall is behind the Asian regions in esports, because in Asia, people are always pushing the players. The players are being pushed harder than people are in the West. They have coaches always telling them what to do. Even in the free time, they are practicing. So technically, they have no free time because they're using their free time to practice. And because they have that pressure behind them to do well or to get out. That is why the Asian players are more ahead than the Western players. Now, that's just the cultural side of things, okay? Now we move on to infrastructure. Now, South Korea has the fastest internet connection in the world, okay? Sure, just like 10 to 30 ping won't be a big difference in 99% of the games, but that one clutch moment where you block a hook on a priority target at the end of the game could be the difference between winning and losing the game, and therefore it could be the difference between you getting top place in Challenger or you getting placed in Challenger than you losing the series and have to play more games. So, and of course, if you want to play at that very top level and you want to play at that pro level, you would have to get every single advantage that you can get, and that includes even just a bit more ping. Of course, by advantage, I don't include cheating because no respect for cheaters, and cheaters are bad. So, and also Seoul, the capital of South Korea, Seoul is the eSports hub of Korea. So pretty much all the pro teams in Korea live in Seoul. All the tournaments are held in Seoul, or their practice facilities are in Seoul. So it's very convenient for players to travel to tournaments, have meetings in team facilities, visit meetups and events at PC bangs, or in that case, PC bangs is what people call internet cafes in Korea, if you didn't know. And of course, in America, the NALCS for League of Legends is held in Los Angeles, California. Now, not every single North American team lives in California. So that means they have to fly there to play every week, which is of course a lot more hassle and a lot more expensive than to just be able to drive there. Of course, in Europe, there are teams living in different countries, so the travel becomes international travel, which is even more of a hassle than domestic travel within the United States. And now we finally get to Oceania. After all of that, after all the cultural differences, after why the big Western regions, NA and EU, are behind the Asian regions. Now we finally get to Oceania. And after explaining for all this time how NA and EU are behind, Oceania is even more behind. They barely get any major lands happening compared to NA and EU. NA and EU, they have lands happening every single week. Alright? Traveling in Oceania is pretty much always overseas. Okay, because every single country is pretty much separated by the sea. So it's always overseas travel, which is even more of a hassle than traveling in EU and NA. And since Australia, and also before I get to that, also a great example for the lands is the Heroes League for Overwatch, and this is the biggest Overwatch event to happen in Oceania, and it's got a prize pool. It's got a prize pool of 10,000 Australian dollars, and the semi-finals and the grand finals were originally to be a LAN in Sydney, Australia, I believe. So 48 hours, so 2 days before the event, the start of the qualifiers, they pushed back the qualifiers for another 2 weeks, and then they made it so that the finals and the semi-finals are no longer LAN events, they're just online events. And we can see that it's too much to invest, like the travel and the accommodation for the players to go to the LANs. They don't want to invest that much. And you can see just how unprofessional this is. 2 days before the tournament, and then pushing back the qualifiers by 2 weeks. You can just see how behind and how unprofessional this is compared to events in North America and Europe. And since Australia and New Zealand, they're so isolated from all the major regions, they're so far apart, they can't really scrim against teams from those bigger regions, the bigger and better regions. They can't scrim against them because the distance is too great. And because they can't scrim with them, they can't get to their level. They can't learn things from those teams. And if they scrim with them, the players will always have 200 ping. And that issue will come again before League of Legends had an Oceanic server. That 200 ping will happen again. People won't try as hard in scrims. Okay, they will be like, okay, we have 200 ping. We're probably gonna lose anyway. We're just gonna do our best, see what happens. They're not really 100% trying hard because they have 200 ping, and it's hard for them to scrim against teams that are better than them when they have 200 ping. So pretty much Oceania is just stuck by itself with no partners and buddies to help out. All right. So for Oceanic teams, in order to improve outside of their region, they're going to have to travel to those major regions, North America, Europe, Korea, China. They're going to have to travel to one of those major regions and boot camp there in order to even start getting to that level of play. And no organization in Oceania has the budget, or maybe they have the budget, but they think it's too risky to invest in boot camping in other regions. Like we've gone over before. So if they are gonna boot camp, especially in the Asian regions, the Western culture of the Oceanic players won't be able to compete with the Koreans and their much more strict, controlled, and disciplined environment. And that's why the Oceanic esports scene is behind the rest of the world.